It's time for a JavaScript aside. Let's talk for a moment about an important, fundamental, and incredibly powerful aspect of the JavaScript programming language that Node relies upon, and one that's often misunderstood. First-class functions and function expressions. Oh, actually, big word alert. First-class functions. Everything you can do with other types, like strings or numbers, you can do with functions. A lot of major programming languages do not have this feature. JavaScript does. It's incredibly powerful, but it also makes for some patterns and some appearances in code that you may not be used to if you're not used to this in JavaScript or other languages that have this feature. But functions in JavaScript are first class. You can use them just like you use any other type. You can even assign them to variables and put them in arrays. Again, it makes for some powerful patterns. And it also allows us to write function expressions. Oh. Big word alert. An expression. An expression just means a block of code that results in a value, like setting a variable equal to a value. That's an expression. Function expressions are possible in JavaScript because functions are first class. So when I write a string, that results in a value. When I write an object or a number, it results in a value. And I can use a function expression to create a function essentially on the fly. All right, let's use Node to run some JavaScript and see what this looks like. I have an app.js file open here in Visual Studio Code. I'll go ahead and write some JavaScript. We'll start with a function statement. That's the kind of function you're used to, most likely. I'll just call this function greet and say hi, and then I'll invoke or call the function with parentheses. Oops. Right. I said invoke the function. Big word alert. Invoke just means run the function, if you haven't heard that phrase before. We also say often call the function. So invoke, call, same thing. All right, so this is just a normal, what's called a function statement. I've declared a function, I've created it here, and I've called it. Let's go run this. I'll go ahead to my command prompt. I'll switch to the location where I have this file, and I'll just type node and then app.js, and it says hi. So that's a normal function statement. Now, we said that functions in JavaScript are first class. Functions are first class. That means we can pass them around like variables, for one thing. So let's say I made a different function called log greeting. And I accept a parameter, and we'll just call this fn for function. And then I'm going to invoke the function that I'm given. Now that might look a little strange, but we're going to give this function another function. This variable here will be a function. We can do that because functions in JavaScript are first class. And then since a function is passed here, I can invoke that function. I can call it. I can say run. So I could say log greeting, and that's a function, and I'm going to give it a function that it's going to use. So greet is a function. Actually, functions in JavaScript are objects, a special kind of object, and that's why this is possible. So just like I might pass a string to a function or a number to a function, I can pass a function. I can use a function like any other type of variable. So here I'm saying call the log greeting function, and this parameter I'm giving it is greet, the greet function. Notice I'm not putting parentheses. That would actually run the function, and I would be giving it the result. But rather, I'm actually literally just giving it the function. So what's going to happen? Well, we'll see that fn will be this greet function, and then it's going to invoke it, which is essentially doing the same as what's right here. So we should still see console.log hi being executed. So now we should see hi twice, here and here. So I'll go ahead and run node app.js again, and there's my two highs. Get that? So this one ran, and in this case, I used the fact that the functions are first class to treat this function like any other variable and pass it around, and then use it. This feels a little strange at first, but it's incredibly powerful and incredibly useful, and you'll actually use this concept, this feature, a lot when you're writing Node.js programs. Now let's see what a function expression looks like. Remember, a function expression is just a special type of expression, an expression being a block of code that results in a value. So this is an expression. I just made a string. This is an expression. I just made a number. And I can, let's say, create a variable, greet me, and I can write my function like I would any other value as an expression here. Notice that I wrote the function on the fly. It's part of this larger statement. So just like I might have put string here, I can write a function. That's a function expression. This is very powerful, again, for a number of reasons. But what I have here is a variable that now has this function, which is actually a special type of object, but has this function as its value. So I can then call it greet me parentheses. I can invoke it. This function is anonymous, meaning I didn't give it a name here, like I did here before the parentheses. But my variable points to it. So when I run the parentheses, the JavaScript engine knows to execute this function, to invoke it. And it's still first class. It's first class. So I can still pass it around. I could pass greet me to my log greeting function. Notice what I just did. I used a function expression to create a function, set a variable equal to that function, and call the function. And then I used that same variable and gave it as a parameter, which also invokes that same function in this parameter here in this function. All right, so this could be a little confusing. I encourage you to try it. Take a good look. Give it a try for yourself. It becomes pretty clear when you stop and look at it. So I could run this in the Node.js command prompt, but for clarity's sake, let's go ahead and step through the code. So I'm going to go to the debug. I'll hit start. All right, so my first greet was called, and now I'm console.logging hi. And then it goes to log greeting. I'm going to step in, and I see that fn is the greet function. That's the function that I just passed, and so it's going to run it. And it runs the console.log hi. Then I'm going to create a variable called greetMe and use a function expression. And now greetMe is that function expression that contains that console.log. So greetMe is now a function, and I can invoke it. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass it to log greeting. This time, fn will be that function with no name, the anonymous function, the one that's set to greet me, because that's what I passed to it down here at the bottom. And I'll invoke it. And if I go to my console window, I see hi Tony twice down there at the bottom. Why? Because I invoked it here, and then I passed it to log greeting and invoked it again. Okay, makes sense? I'm creating functions on the fly and passing them around because functions in JavaScript are first class. All right, now in Visual Studio Code, I could either close this or I could hit stop And that stops the code from running, and it stops the debugger. Now let's show one more interesting pattern that you'll see a lot. I'm going to use a function expression on the fly. I'm going to log greeting. And then instead of passing a variable, I'm actually going to write the function. Let's say hello Tony, so you can tell the difference. Notice I wrote the function expression as if I was creating it as part of the invocation of log greeting. In other words, I could write an actual string or a number instead of a variable, and I can also write a function instead of setting the function to a variable. And log greeting will get this function and execute it. Again, you'll see this kind of pattern a lot. Why bother setting this function equal to a variable if I'm only going to use it once, for example? So I'll just create the function on the fly and write it here. And JavaScript, the JavaScript engine, allows this kind of syntax. It's really very convenient. So if I run this, I'll just go back and run this here, node app.js. See that last hello, Tony? The function was created on the fly, passed to log greeting, and log greeting invoked that function. So this is the kind of pattern, the kind of things you can do with first-class functions and function expressions in JavaScript. We're going to see this a lot. So if you're not familiar with this pattern, or maybe you have seen it and not fully realized what it was, we're going to use it a lot and see it a lot. And so we needed to understand this in order to understand some of the things that we're going to see in this section. All right, so that's first-class functions and function expressions. Let's move on with the course.